The president's gambit in North Korea is an utter, giant, shambolic failure. It's a giant fail. I have been very critical of the president's strategy on North Korea, but I was willing to withhold judgment. My feeling was, if the president wants to try his sycophancy for denuclearization negotiation tactic, if he wants to pretend that he can flatter Kim Jong-un into giving up his nuclear weapons, which again, makes no sense. The only reason Kim Jong-un is even a player on the world stage is because of his nuclear weapons. But if Trump thinks that he can flatter him into something, if he thinks that he can grant him world credibility by meeting with him and conferring America's imprimatur of quasi-approval upon him, if he thinks he can get him to denuclearize, well, it's a high-risk, high-reward strategy, because if it works, then the president wins the Nobel Peace Prize. But if it doesn't work, then the United States has just sunk down to the level of the North Korean dictatorship diplomatically by sitting in a room with one of the worst people on planet Earth, a man who's keeping millions of people in a giant gulag, a person who has executed legitimately tens of thousands of people, a person who kills his relatives with anti-aircraft guns and anthrax at airports. The president of the United States sat down with that guy not once, but twice. And again, if this was all part of some grand plan, fine. It turns out today it was not part of a grand plan. And I'm going to show you how this whole thing fell apart, how it was never properly planned, and how the president of the United States made the United States look foolish in this entire endeavor and continues to do so today in his talk about Kim Jong-un. The bottom line is this. Negotiation takes place between people who are seeking some sort of common interest. The United States does not have a common interest with the Kim regime. Now, is it possible that negotiators could find such a common interest? Perhaps, but that would require actual diplomatic initiative. That would require pre-negotiations. That would require that Kim Jong-un had already signed off on some stuff before President Trump ever got in a room with him. What you don't do is send the president of the United States around like a used car salesman trying to pawn off a bad lemon on some unsuspecting schmuck. Okay, that's not what the president of the United States is there to do. We have an entire diplomatic corps that is there to ensure that at the end of a summit like this, that something gets signed that looks like a concession by the North Koreans, or that looks like a deal, or that looks like anything. The president didn't even get an empty pledge from the North Koreans this time. He walked away from the table. Now, the president is right to walk away from the table. My point is he shouldn't have been at the table in the first place. You don't come to the table with the worst dictatorship on planet Earth simply because you want a photo op. You better have a plan, because otherwise you just took the most powerful, most moral country in the history of the world and put it on an equal photo op playing field with one of the worst people on planet Earth. Here's how things went down. According to the New York Times today, President Trump and Kim Jong-un, North Korea's leader, abruptly ended their second summit meeting on Thursday after talks collapsed, with the two leaders failing to agree on any steps toward nuclear disarmament or measures to ease tensions on the Korean Peninsula. Sometimes you just have to walk, Mr. Trump said at an afternoon news conference in Hanoi, the capital of Vietnam. That's true. Sometimes you do just have to walk. The question is why you had walked into Vietnam in the first place without any sort of pre-negotiations. Again, I bashed President Obama back when he was Senator Obama in 2008 for saying he wanted to meet with the Iranians and the Cubans without precondition. You think I'm not going to do the same thing with regard to North Korea and President Trump, especially when the president confers all sorts of beautiful words upon a piece of human debris like Kim Jong-un? The president of the United States went to Vietnam and suggested that Kim Jong-un, unlike, many spoiled billionaires' kids, he was really a normal guy. And then they issued a statement yesterday. The United States issued a statement talking about President Trump's special relationship with Kim. Hey, you don't have to hug the dictator to negotiate with the dictator. You don't have to do that. But here's the problem. The president has a personal negotiation strategy. He's been using it in business for years. And that strategy is essentially blustering threats followed by the possibility of a warm, cordial embrace. The president thinks he can flatter people into doing what he wants, and if he doesn't get that, then he tries to threaten them into doing what he wants. Well, that's not a strategy. That is just a wild vacillation from one point to the other. Remember, 2 years ago, the president of the United States was threatening little Kim Jong-un with the biggest nuclear button in the world, and now he's calling him his best friend. Does that seem like a strategy to you, or does that just seem like wild flailing about? Well, I'll tell you, after what I saw today from the president, it seems like wild flailing about. According to Trump, he said Kim had offered to dismantle the North's most important nuclear facility if the United States lifted the sanctions on his nation, but he would not commit to do the same for other elements of its weapons program. Mr. Trump said that was a deal breaker. He said it was about the sanctions. Basically, they wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, but we couldn't do that. Well, that's something that you should have known walking in, is it not? I mean, this is why, again, we have an entire State Department that is designed to do these things. But I want you to see how people moved from Trump is a genius for engaging in the negotiation to Trump is a genius for walking away in the space of 48 hours. It's wildly inconsistent. Not only is it wildly inconsistent, again, I point you to the fact that if Barack Obama did this, people on the right would lose their bleep. They would lose their minds. And they should, because the President of the United States represents not only the people living in the United States today, he represents the Constitution of the United States, he represents the American mission, he represents liberty. It was one of the most shameful things about the Obama presidency, the fact that President Obama was constantly trying to make common cause with the Iranian mullahs, for example. It was gross. Well, the same thing is true when the President of the United States does this. Now, again, I think all of this was true before he walked away. The reason I'm angry is not because he walked away. That's the right thing. I'm glad he walked away. He should walk away. The United States is not in a position to make concessions to an evil gulag master. Something straight out Austin Powers over here. We're not in that position. So the president is correct to walk away. The question is, I was assured that there was a strategy here. I was assured that there was a broader strategy here. What is the broader strategy? Is there no broader strategy? I was assured by the president that the threat of a nuclear North Korea had completely been taken off the table. He said that on Twitter, that we shouldn't worry about it anymore. Okay, so what's the plan? Was there ever a plan? And for people who say, well, it's just talking, it's just talking. It's not just talking. When the president of the United States creates an image of the United States as a place willing to overlook the most brutal human rights violations on the planet in exchange for nothing, in exchange for literally nothing. Apparently, there was a meeting that was scheduled today. The premature end to the negotiations leaves the unusual rapprochement between the United States and North Korea that has unfolded for most of a year at a deadlock, with the North retaining both its nuclear arsenal and facilities believed to be producing additional fissile material for warheads. It also represents a major setback at a difficult political moment for Trump, who has long presented himself as a tough negotiator capable of bringing adversaries into a deal and had made North Korea the signature diplomatic initiative of his presidency. And here I will point out that the president's history of negotiation as president of the United States has been rather poor. It has been rather poor. On every budget deal, he has caved to the Democrats. He's undercut his own party to do so. In negotiations with North Korea, he comes away with nothing after spending an enormous amount of his own political capital and the political capital of the United States on these foolhardy negotiations. Now, I'm going to show you how this unfolded. So, as of yesterday, President Trump was still talking up all this stuff. He said, listen, we're having great meetings. We had dinner. It was fabulous. We're sitting next to each other. We're best friends.
So we're going to have a very busy day tomorrow, and we'll probably have a pretty quick dinner. And a lot of things are going to be solved, I hope, and I think it'll lead to really a wonderful situation long term. And our relationship is a very special relationship.
A special relationship. That's a phrase usually reserved for the United States' relations with Great Britain. The special relationship between the U.S. and Great Britain was the hallmark of World War II. Now he's saying that he has a very special relationship with a guy who literally strapped his uncle to an anti-aircraft gun and blew him in half, who literally took his brother-in-law and had him anthraxed at a public airport. But we have a special relationship. Now, maybe you're so cynical about politics or America's moral standing in the world that you think it doesn't matter what the president says. After all, who really cares? Does it really make much of a difference? The answer is yes. It legitimizes Kim Jong-un in his own country. It legitimizes Kim Jong-un around the world. It makes it look like Kim Jong-un outplayed the president of the United States. That's what it looks like right here. And Kim Jong-un knew what he was playing at. He said yesterday, I have a feeling that good results are going to come from this. Why? Because his real hope is that he was going to be able to sucker Trump into removing the sanctions. That's why, again, the president is absolutely correct to walk away from the negotiations. The question is why he was at the table in the first place without any of these things being discussed. It's not like this was a minor ancillary issue that killed the deal. This was the central issue of the deal. The central issue was, what is North Korea going to do in exchange for removing sanctions? And it better be total denuclearization. That was the entire premise of these negotiations. And when we say that it's, what I love is the ridiculous line that it's some sort of massive win for the United States to sit down with a tin pot dictator like Kim Jong-un. Really? The president of the United States can sit down with anyone on earth that he wants. When the most prominent recent guest to North Korea from America was Dennis Rodman, I'm going to go with Kim Jong-un's social book is not exactly full up. It's not a big win for the United States to sit down with a piece of garbage like Kim Jong-un. Anyway, here was Kim Jong-un saying that he had a feeling that good results were going to come out of this.
Kim, are you confident?
Thank you.
위원장님 자신 있으십니까?
적당하긴 이라고 생각합니다.
Well, it's too early to tell.
예단하긴 않겠습니다.
but I wouldn't say that I'm pessimistic.
누나 나의 직감으로 보면 좋은 결과가 생길 거라고 믿습니다.
But from what I feel right now, I do have a feeling that good results would come out.
Okay, so that is, again, his good result was that he thought he was going to roll Trump. Now, Trump wasn't fully rolled. Good for him. But again, if he had been fully rolled, I'm sure there would be people praising him today for that too. Okay, we're going to talk in a second about how this thing ended, how it went down, and how the defense went from Trump is a brilliant negotiator to Trump has all the cojones in the world for walking away from this. He has cojones for walking in, and he has cojones for walking out. Well, then you have now created an untestable and unverifiable thesis. Okay, if the hypothesis is that it's good for him to walk in because something good will result, and then nothing good results, so it's good for him to walk out, which was it? We're going to get to that in just 1 second, and I'll explain really why I'm so ticked this morning, because I'm upset. I will explain in a second why I'm so ticked. We'll get to that in just 1 second. President Trump meets with Kim, and everything is going swimmingly. Everything is going just great. And Republicans are saying, well, it's going so great over there, and that's why Democrats scheduled the Michael Cohen hearing, because it's just terrible. They wanted to distract from President Trump over in Vietnam because things are just going so awesome over there. And then you got Kim saying, listen, I'm ready to denuclearize. I'm prepared to denuclearize. Now, what he means by denuclearize, obviously, is that the United States pulls out of all of its troops out of South Korea, and the entire continent becomes free of American influence. That's what Kim meant by denuclearize. So when he says this, understand that he is lying, at least if you think denuclearize means he stops his nuclear program. But here was Kim making the overture that is not real.
김 위원장님 기획할 준비 되셨습니까?
그런 의지가 없다면 여기 오지 않았을 겁니다.
If I'm not willing to do that, I won't be here right now.
That's a good answer. Wow, that might be the best answer you've ever heard.
아마 최고의 대답을 하실 것 같습니다.
우리
Are you willing to take concrete steps to denuclearize or not quite yet?
비핵화를 위해서 구체적인 조치들을 취하실 결심이 되어 있습니까? 아니면 아직 안 됐습니까? 아직 그때까지는.
오늘 지금 그 이야기를 하고 있습니다.
That is what we are discussing right now.
Okay, so, she is, that would be Kim Jong-un and his sister basically saying, yeah, this is what we're discussing. And they have no intention of handing over their nuclear weapons. The minute the Kim family hands over the nuclear weapons, they get deposed in North Korea. Everybody knows this. This is obvious to anyone who's watching this. But that doesn't stop President Trump's fans from praising his brilliance in negotiation early on in this thing. And as I say, I was willing to withhold judgment, not moral judgment, because again, the United States should not be granting this sort of legitimacy to an evil dictator. I wasn't willing to suspend judgment when it came to the president flattering Kim Jong-un to the skies and talking about his beautiful pen pal relationship with him. People saying today that it's just like Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev. Two differences. One, Gorbachev represented a nation that was an existential threat to the United States and that ruled over half of Eastern Europe. And also, President Reagan never downplayed the evil of the evil empire. He was constantly talking about the evil of the Soviet Union. Constantly. President Trump has taken the opposite tack, which is to sort of pretend that it's not all that evil over there for purposes of trying to flatter the Kim regime into doing what he wants. Okay, so President Trump is doing these negotiations, and supposedly everything is going swimmingly. Everything is going great. Newt Gingrich, who's obviously a major fan of the president, he goes on Fox News and he says, it's fantastic stuff. Look at Kim Jong-un, he's opening up to the world. Look at him, he's just opening up.
Everybody watching tonight, if you see Kim Jong-un answering questions off the cuff to the news media, you're seeing a historic change that every person in North Korea is going to pick up on. I mean, it is an enormous moment because he's coming out of a shell of total control into a world where he's now trying to interact with Trump in a way that makes him more normal. And I think there's a real piece of this of trying to become normal.
Oh, well, that's what's happening here. He's becoming normal. Now, I heard the same exact bullcrap about the Iranian regime when Barack Obama was trying to hand over the store to them. Oh, they're moderates now. They're normalizing. That's what they're doing. They're becoming normal, don't you see? Well, everybody's in the streets chanting death to America. Okay, so there's all this buildup. Oh, the brilliant negotiation tactic of going to a place and being with a person in the same place at the same time. Wow. And saying nice things about that person. What diplomatic initiative. What incredible. Now, as I said, if the result had been something of any substance, or if there'd been a plan, then I would concede this was out of the box. It was weird, but it worked. That's not what happened. And not only did the president walk away from the table, as he should have, because North Korea never intended on giving anything up. Not only that, but then Trump did something, and this is what has really set me off today. What has really set me off today is President Trump was asked about Otto Warmbier. Now, you'll remember the case of Otto Warmbier. He was an American college student. He visited North Korea, and he took a poster off the wall, supposedly. The North Korean regime took hold of him and literally beat him to death. They beat him into a coma, they made him a vegetable, and then they shipped him back to the United States. You'll remember it was a major issue because one Donald J. Trump spoke about Otto Warmbier and had his parents to the State of the Union address just a couple of years ago. Now here's the President of the United States, the most moral power on the face of the earth and in human history, talking about how he trusts Kim Jong-un, that Otto Warmbier was not actually murdered. Otto Warmbier, something bad happened to him, but I mean, I trust this Kim guy over here, the one who murders his relatives with anti-aircraft guns.
Just wasn't to his advantage to allow that to happen. Those prisons are rough. They're rough places, and bad things happened. But I really don't believe that he was. I don't believe he knew about it.
Did he tell you that he did not? Did Kim Jong-un tell you?
He felt badly about it. I did speak to him. He felt very badly. But he knew the case very well. But he knew it later. You know, you got a lot of people, a big country, a lot of people, and in those prisons and those camps, you have a lot of people, and some really bad things happened to Otto. Some really, really bad things.
Why are you?
But he tells me that he didn't know about it, and I will take him at his word.
Okay, absolute, sheer, unmitigated moral garbage right there. I will take Kim at his word. How many American citizens does he think North Korea was holding? He was holding an American citizen. Everybody knew about it. Kim Jong-un certainly knew about it. This guy was beat to death. And now he's going to take Kim Jong-un, an evil piece of garbage, at his word? That's what the President of the United States is. And don't tell me the alternative is nuclear war. If the alternative were nuclear war, don't you think we would have been at nuclear war with North Korea sometime over the past 20 years? They've had nuclear weapons for a solid 15 years at this point. I've been told over and over, this is the same exact tactic you heard about Iran. Well, if you don't go for President Obama's deal, that means you want war with the Iranians. No, it absolutely does not. I am not suggesting that war with the North Koreans is the solution. I am suggesting that the solution is not the President of the United States going out there and saying that he trusts a man who had an American murdered. And Trump does this all the time. He does this all the time. And I know there are a bunch of people out there who's, well, that's realpolitik, you know. I'm so dark and cynical about it. It's because politics is house of cards. There's no moral component to politics. You know, so if Trump is praising Putin because it's advantageous, or if he's praising Kim Jong-un because it's advantageous, well, what's the big deal? I mean, don't we all know that politics is dirty pool and people? It's the scene from The Godfather where Michael Corleone is walking around with Kay and he's explaining how he's just like a senator because senators have people killed too. This kind of faux sophistication about politics. Well, you know, we're pretty bad too. Trump has done that routine with Vladimir Putin for years. He said that he took Vladimir Putin at his word that he didn't interfere in the 2016 election. He said that while Vladimir Putin has had his political opponents killed, we here in the United States have done some of that stuff too. And now he's extending that to North Korea. There's no excuse for this. None. There's none. I mean, imagine you're the Warmbier family and you're sitting home and Trump brought you to the State of the Union address 2 years ago, not 10 years ago, 2 years ago, and made your son a national issue. And now he's standing there saying, well, you know, the regime that murdered him seemed like nice people, seemed like good guys. We got a good relationship. If you were doing that for some effect, at least you could point to the effect. If you're doing it to no effect, then you just look like a tool. But President Trump says that this wasn't a walk away like you get up and walk out. He said, no, this was very friendly. We shook hands. There's a warmth we have, and I hope that stays. International negotiations are not won or lost based on personal relationships. This is a myth of history. Okay, it wasn't that the Cold War ended because President Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev became friends. The Cold War ended because every incentive aligned against Mikhail Gorbachev, because Gorbachev made the mistake of believing that if he allowed a few of the fringe nations around the edges of the Soviet Union to leave, then the others would not leave, and that he would be saving money in the process. This is well documented inside the Soviet archives. He didn't do it because he was personal friends with Reagan. He was like, you know what? Communism is bad now. I guess we're done. Gorbachev never expected the Soviet Union to collapse. Negotiations do not take place simply out of love between the participants. This is true in business. It's true in life. It is certainly true in international politics, where you are representing an entire nation and or a dictatorship that has to be preserved at all costs, including the cost of murdering many of its own citizens. There's no excuse for the president's behavior here. None. None. The only excuse would have been if he had somehow done all this crap and for some odd reason it had worked and Kim Jong-un had committed to denuclearization with verifiability. He committed to none of those things and he still got out of the president that they are besties and also Otto Warmbier, maybe maybe it was just sort of an accident in one of those crazy prison camps. So apparently, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he said that officials had worked through the previous night and into the morning to come up with terms acceptable to both leaders. He said, when you are dealing with a country that is of the nature of North Korea, it is often the case that only the most senior leaders have the capacity to make those important decisions. He said, we'll each need to regroup a little bit. There was no statement from the Kim regime. So, giant moral fail. Now, maybe this all results in something good down the line, but at this very moment, if I have to judge at this very moment, and I will judge the president on moral grounds here, no excuse, just no excuse for that. There's none. I do not have the capacity to speak in defense of a president who is saying that Otto Warmbier that the family of Otto Warmbier should apparently be trusted less than Kim Jong-un. I just don't know how to even remotely justify that or explain it. It doesn't hold.